Why hello there! As some of you may have seen, Springfest 2021 has been announced to be an online form of tournament, and they're actually doing a different tournament for each format per region, so that's going to be pretty hype. It is going to be remote fight, so make sure you guys set up your remote setups and test them out in other local sized tournaments before that, so you can actually, get a feel for how remote fight works. But of course, I'm very happy to see that with remote fight being announced as the main format of play for Springfest, and there being an actual big competitive event for this year, a lot of people have been getting interested in competitive Vanguard again, whether that's Premium, Standard, or Vmium, or V Premium. And as you know, both Premium and Standard will be changed quite a bit with the release of the first Overdress booster, and so the one format that won't change so much is actually V Premium, as V Premium is going into its release of Clan Selection 2 in just a couple days. I wanted to quickly sit down and talk about the meta impact that Clan Selection 1 had, which released this past month, because this really did shake up the meta for the V Premium format, and on top of that, honestly, it just made it very, very fun. The battlefield is very, very open. A lot of decks are, standing toe-to-toe with each other, and so I wanted to quickly go over how this set impacted the meta just really quickly in today's video. So we're going to look over three categories of decks, some that are considered the top meta. So there's either decks that were introduced by this set or decks that got a good extra bit of support in this set. And then we're going to take a look at some tier 2 decks that need to be respected, should be tested against, should be taken account of for, when you're preparing for a big tournament such as Springfest. And then we're going to take a look at another one, which is basically like fun decks, not really impactful in the meta, but might come up, but don't necessarily have to spend too much time testing against them, because you should be dedicating your time to other matchups. Also, if you still need any product from Clan Selection 1 or want to order Clan Selection 2 or just want to order Overdress product, you can actually check out parkage.com and use the discount code DifferentFight for 5% discount at checkout. They're actually doing a special bundle where you can get all the start decks for Overdress as well as the first booster set for a lower price, so if you do want to check that out, go ahead. Anyway, let's get into it. First deck we're going to take a look at is going to be Spectral Duke. So Spectral Duke kind of gave Golds a breath of fresh air because, they just got the Gurgud hit, and then you basically didn't really know what to do with your deck because Gurgud was the only viable way to really build it before, and it was one of the best decks. And now you can't run Percival, but they gave you Spectral Duke, and now Percival has a new best friend. So Spectral Duke is pretty good as a fast, aggressive Axle deck, as a lot of Axle decks are, and it's pretty easy to set up as well. Plus, there's a lot, gets to swing with extra crits and stuff, and basically just restand a bunch, and just overall, it's really, really strong. It's not groundbreakingly strong the way that Gurgud was, but it's just a great deck overall, and it definitely feels like it stands at the top of the meta, together with a lot of other decks. And a lot of players that you ask will definitely tell you that, Spectral Duke as a deck is very, very strong and definitely worth respecting into the competitive format. Murakumo, I'm not going to talk about Shiriki so much as I want to talk about Yasuye, which is still considered one of the top decks. It's funny how we're looking at Axel back to back here, but Yasuye is actually playing the new Shiriki at one copy or so, just basically being able to use her Guardian Circle effect to Soul Blast 2 and minus 30k to one of your opponent's units, which is pretty good simply because of the fact that it's basically the equivalent of a critical sentinel, so you get to just kind of 2 to pass your opponent's Vanguard with this, or just completely guard a huge attack, or use this against things like the Hamiel, so it's actually not a bad card to be teching into Yasuye as well, so it's pretty good. Shiriki deck on its own isn't that hot though, so definitely more emphasis on Yasuye there. Chaos Breaker is definitely the highlight of this set, I think, for a lot of people. Everyone kind of looks at it as sort of the big meta defining deck. Everyone's super hyped about it. It's pretty expensive. Probably the most expensive cards in the set are the Starvader ones, but the deck itself is kind of clunky. You need to draw into specific pieces. The locks are good, but they aren't doing so much against certain decks. It's not as powerful as the deck was in G either. It's still strong because it's Chaos and it has lock, but there's a lot of bad matchups. However, there are some top meta decks that this deck can definitely abuse, and it has a strong point that this deck is easily mixable with other things. We've seen Chaos Messiah being pretty popular, where you're basically running a Messiah deck, but you just run all 3 Starvaders on top of that. Now, whether the Chaos Messiah deck or the pure Chaos deck is better, that's a different question on its own, but considering the fact that decks like Luard are still super popular and are still considered as top meta decks, it's definitely a good matchup for Chaos. And WCC Kai actually did a good video on the different matchups that Chaos has between the different clans, and while it kind of depends on what you're playing against, because if you're playing against a lot of Night Rose, then obviously Chaos isn't going to do much because Night Rose just kind of empties her own board and doesn't really worry about Chaos on her own. On the other hand, decks like Luard just completely fold because you steal all their forces and they just lose a lot of their momentum, so definitely feels like a good deck that you should 100% be prepared for going into Springfest. Gastille, while not really a deck of its own, but the 3 supporting cards, which are Gastille, Poisonic Abductor, and Ironheart Assassin, are definitely amazing support for the Sharot deck, which was super meta way back in the VBT09 format. Basically gives the deck an extra win con, while also opening up the ability to set up Soul more consistently thanks to Poison Nick, and also the ability to just countercharge way more than before thanks to the Iron Heart. So overall, this deck feels really good because there's a lot of different ways you can take it. There's some people that play like 8 different CCs in one deck and things like that, and Gastile is just like an icing on the cake. People play as like a 1 or a 2 of. It's also great in premium, but we are talking about V premium in this video, so I don't want to focus on that too much. But overall, this card is definitely feeling like a really strong support card for the deck, and it definitely pushed up Shara a lot, and you see it a lot thanks to the new support from Client Selection 1 as well. Chronojet, one of my personal favorites, definitely got some of its biggest sort of like weaknesses patched up thanks to this set as well. Time Lever Dragon basically offering you a really amazing going first, well, quote unquote stride, simply because you have the ability to multi-attack or build up powerful columns, and also just like do things with your on-place effects. You can play some 1-ofs and 2-ofs in your deck as well that you search out with the Time Leaper. It's just an amazing card overall. Zaid is also a great grade 2, being able to give you that field control aspect to your deck as well, while also comboing into the Ribble on top of that. 8 is a really consistent search card. On top of that, the reprints are super good, and Ribble, finally coming out in English, gave this deck what it needed, which is that extra ceiling and ability to just finish games with that superior call that you can put onto extra force markers, and just overall Jet feels really good. I know people are often talking if it deserves to be tier 1, if it's really at the top, or if it's just kind of like good, and I think that argument will continue for a long time. Maybe when we get the grade 2 promo that just came out in Japan, it'll change, but for now the deck is already amazing as it is. Although I do think that the deck is very like piece reliant on like drawing those Ribbles, and so therefore if you don't, you know, this deck draws a lot. It has like draw a card staple in almost every single effect, but if you don't and you don't see those Ribbles, the deck's power definitely decreases quite a lot. Finally, I want to talk about Beatrice. Beatrice and the Ghosties definitely added a lot into V Premium as well, simply because you gave, like, Beatrice itself gives Night Rose an extra way to superior call things, but that isn't just like Columbard and the Night Storm, or Night Mist rather, and so because of that, you basically get way more consistent like kill turns, way more consistent setup turns. You do Soul Blast more than before, but it's not really that big of a issue. On top of that, Jessie the Ghosty gave the deck some extra counter charge, which is also really nice. Some people play a full-on like Ghosty hybrid running Damians. Some people play a full-on Ghosty deck with Beatrice as the focus. These cards really offered a lot to Granblue as a whole in V Premium, and it feels like, in my opinion, Night Rose is one of the better decks in the meta right now, because it just has such an incredible, like, so many different builds that it's hard to say which one really is the best at the moment, and at the same time it also has a huge ceiling in terms of power and multi-attacks. Sure, Beatrice can multi-attack more, but her power is a lot lower, so you definitely like lose to defensives a lot more than Night Rose does. So overall, like, these cards are super amazing and just really strong. Moving into the sort of tier 2 contenders, so things you should definitely account for but not necessarily expect to see at the top tables all the time, I would put Malkuth Melek here. I think it definitely has some power in just how defensive it is and being able to generate so much power and guard restricts and everything on the field as well. There's definitely many ways you can build this deck as well, which is really good. So overall, I think this deck should be accounted for. It's very consistent, generates Protect 2s very consistently, very bulky defenses as well. So it's kind of the opposite of Gavriel, where that deck is just trying to like one-shot you as fast as possible. This deck wants to play the long game. It can definitely like tank out a lot of decks, even Gavriel herself, to be honest, thanks to all the powerful intercepts it has. So I think this definitely should be on your radars just in case, and I think it definitely has some potential as well. Tachikaze as well, you know, we've talked about it as like a super good budget deck, but honestly, this is pretty decent as a deck itself, right? Because Gigano Blazer is a really good setup card going first, especially Spino Extort just offers you really nice multi-attack potential and like setup as well, and then Savage Shooter is just a fantastic card to ride on your first turn as well, and on rearguard it also does some good work as well. So like, this deck has good multi-attacks. It's not super amazing. The Gaia deck itself is pretty good. Like, Anger Blader is still, I think, pretty strong and should be on your radars as well, so you definitely should consider that as something that you might run into in your Swiss rounds as well. But Tachi's overall got some really good support, and I think that ignoring them might cost you some games, so you should definitely test against them as well. Finally, I think Maidens are, some people would argue, tier 1. I think they're a really strong tier 2, if not at the top of tier 2 here. Stand Peony basically being Katrina in standard is really good. Going first, your grade 3 turn isn't super fantastic, but there are definitely many different ways to build this deck that can potentially help you to have powerful turns on grade 3 even going first. But regardless, this deck is just really strong. You don't call much from your hand because of all the token generation and extra card draw that this deck has. Flower Carpet being like recursive from the graveyard is really good, or sorry, from the drop. So you get recursion from the drop, you get all this extra card draw thanks to like things like Fall Vine, and Maiden of Stampede gives you really strong kill turn potential as well, or just overall consistent power potential, I guess I should say. It's not really like it blows your opponent completely like out of the water like, you know, Gavriel does. It's more so of just like consistent, always asking for big shields, always asking for your opponent's hand to just like deplete until they eventually lose. So I think is a really strong tier 2 contender. Finally, fun decks that I think you don't really need to worry about as much. Witches for Shadows definitely did not feel super strong. The deck just feels kind of awkward right now because like you don't really have many ways to set up your opponent's like field to have like a bunch of grade zeros and like to like do that big disruption that the deck could do in Legion. And overall it just feels like they tried to go for flavor and they kind of like didn't really reach it, and they tried to go for some power and didn't reach it at all, so you end up with this like weird halfway point. So the deck, like, sure, it's cool, it's like fun and like nice aesthetically, but it just doesn't really do that much, which is quite unfortunate. Shirayuki as well is a nice little deck and I got some nice supportive pieces, but compared to the ability of just like super multi-attacking and like multiple Vanguard swings and everything that the Yasuya deck can do, it's just really not that much. At this point you rather play Hyuga, honestly, rather than the Shirayuki dedicated build as well, but it's definitely fun. Oh, Vermilion, you definitely tried, but it's yeah, this is, you know, just multiple drive checks while also blasting yourself in the head speedrun. Finally, Mega Colony. Mega Colony interestingly got really strong rear guards like Intrude Scissors, and I guess like the high class moth is also a really good card as well. But then like every time they release a different grade 3, like Venom Stinger this time, that just has a different focus, and the focus for Mega Colony in itself just feels like it's all over the place. Like people play Gridora with Venom Stinger and they try to like do all kinds of things and like play different like grade 3s that each do different things, and just feels like nothing really goes together that much. So you have this like awkward mess that's just like trying to do something while most of your deck is really strong, but the grade 3s just kind of like do different things every time, and focusing on one doesn't do enough, and then you try to focus on two and it feels like it goes all over the place. So I think this deck maybe has potential if properly figured out, but for the time being it doesn't really seem that threatening. And so there you have it. That is my quick overview of the general meta impact that Clan Selection 1 has right now in V Premium. It's kind of like a set breakdown except in reverse order, and of course there's a lot of amazing reprints in this set as well. I don't want to talk about those too much. We're going to do this again for Clan Selection 2. I'm not sure at which point, probably a couple of weeks after the release. I don't think it's as meta impactful, but there's definitely some amazing decks in that one as well. Definitely a lot of good budget decks too, and a lot of variants in the deck builds too. Like you look at Dauntless, which can be like splashed into everything. That's going to be a lot to discuss in its own right. But overall, these sets are definitely fantastic. I think a lot of people really love them and feel super happy that they exist. And especially as we wait for Overdress to come out, like right now, V Premium is just super fun. It's very enjoyable, very diverse format, and I'm very excited to see which decks actually top for it in Springfest as well. Anyway, that's basically gonna be it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I do want to push out more of this kind of V Premium focused content for the time being as well, because, you know, there's still quite a bit of time until Springfest, and I think people should really be well aware of what the format is and what's good, because again, as I said, this is the one format that you can definitely start playtesting for already and like be prepared for before events actually happen. So definitely use your time wisely to prepare for Springfest instead of just waiting for Overdress as well, because I think that especially in this format you can playtest more so than any other right now, and so I think it's really worth it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.